asking the questions mainstream journalists will never ask. This is your Richie Allen Show on richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, and triggerwarning.tv.
Without any further ado, let's welcome back to the programme former MI5 agent, whistleblower, of course, Iraq, the intelligence services keeping files on socialist politicians, the Israeli embassy. We could be here all day. Had to flee for his life many years ago, back in the late 1990s. We've spoken at length to him about that. Let's welcome back to the programme David Shayler. David, welcome back. Always good to be with you.
Thanks, Richie. Great to be back on the show again.
Thanks for coming on. What are your thoughts straight off the bat, David, with respect to this Remembrance, not parade, but Remembrance service today in Manchester, covered right across the country? The mainstream media presenters, the A-list presenters coming to present from Manchester, speaking to the victims and their families and first responders. What's that all about? That it's very unusual. What's going on psychologically with that sort of coverage?
Well, it's not unusual for them to commemorate, obviously, when these atrocities happen. But obviously with this one, it's peculiar because there's so many unanswered questions, but as usual. And obviously, I've said on this show before how the father of who the man they're saying is the bomber, Salman Abedi, Ramadan Abedi, was in fact the MI6 agent Tunworth, who was paid money by MI6 in the 1990s to try and assassinate Gaddafi. And all the stuff that's come out around that, around the Islamic fighting group, all that kind of thing, seems to be pointing very much towards the idea that MI6 were backing this group, giving them free passage over to Libya, allowing them in and out of the country, so they could assassinate Gaddafi even after the 90s, even when Gaddafi was on our side. So all these services and stuff, I mean, they with their stuff these days, with all these kind of staged events and things like that, that's exactly what I'm not saying that actually the whole thing's a staged event, but it's all about the media management, isn't it? It's all about how you see these things and think something's happened because people keep repeating it. But I don't think we're anywhere near the truth about Manchester yet.
You came on with me last year, a few days afterwards, and you talked about Ramadan Abedi, Agent Tunworth, and I didn't know anything about that. I did remember vaguely that back when you were on the run, you did talk to the BBC about the MI6 complicity, about MI6 being complicit in an attempt to assassinate Gaddafi, and I never put two and two together. And I know that when you spoke with me last year about that, you shared that information with a number of mainstream media organisations in this country. I did, because when that conversation between you and I went on YouTube, I sent it to the news desks of every major newspaper in the country, and I never got a single response. And to this day, although The Guardian have briefly mentioned, and I think the BBC Online in the last 12 months have briefly mentioned Ramadan Abedi, they never mentioned that Abedi was on the payroll of MI6 and that he was part of an assassination squad to take out Gaddafi, even though, David, they must know now that this is factual, and yet they just refuse to report it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I say, well, I gave it straight away to Theresa May as Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the opposition, and the head of the Met. And no one seems to want to get back to me. And obviously, this is partly to do with my problem in the world, is at the moment the dark elite are trying to essentially airbrush me from history. I noticed recently that my articles I did for Neon Nettle a few years ago, where it was actually a reputable site, have now been taken down, for example. I've noticed lots of links to work I've done have been taken down. So this is what they do. They say they can't beat your truth, so they have to use other tactics, and they use the Orwellian tactics of simply airbrushing you out of history, basically.
Yeah, we've seen that this week with a BBC journalist called Emma Barnett, who seems to be on the rise at the BBC. She's a 30-something presenter whose parents were very dubious characters who ran a brothel here in Manchester. And it seems that when Barnett was in high school, emails between her and her father suggested that she knew that, he was running a brothel. And yet people because she's written for the Telegraph, because the BBC have earmarked her as a big star of the future. She sat in for Andrew Marr last weekend, in fact. They've actually been tampering with her Wikipedia page to remove all mention of the fact that her parents spent time in prison for running a brothel. In fact, there are people countering that, but they had changed her Wikipedia page to suggest that her father was a businessman and her mother was a housewife. No, they weren't. They were running a brothel. It's extraordinary, right? Right. Madness.
This is extraordinary. I've been following Craig Murray's coverage of Wikipedia. And how they've got this one character, I can't remember his name now, obviously a pseudonym, but he goes around changing entries, to essentially defame or shown a less good light, people who are essentially dissenting, people are opposing war and things like that, and then giving people who are on the side of the Zionists a clear pass, or they won't mention things there. I say, this is where we are. This is what it's come to, is where it's just them lying all the time. They're just liars and cheats. What I can't understand is why people are not making more of this. I mean, recently we've seen the discrediting of the chemical attack. We know now that the Organisation for the Prevention of Chemical Warfare has said that was a fake. No, absolutely no doubt whatsoever. So the reasons for the strike on Syria were false, and it was obviously false from the word go. So we now have the British government in the position, once again, of having committed a war crime, because that's what it is. There was no justification anyway, even there had been chemical weapons factories, but there weren't. But nobody seems to be saying anything about this. And it's the same with the Skirple poisoning. The Skirples have now disappeared.
Disappeared off the face of the earth. By the way, do you think it's a coincidence? This sounds like a very leading question, but it isn't, because you might disagree. Is it a coincidence that on the day of the royal wedding, let's call it that, on that particular day, it was announced that Sergei Skripal was released from hospital? That was a wonderful coincidence that the eyes of the world's media are focused on a ridiculous, outlandish, outrageous waste of taxpayers' money wedding, while at the same time the biggest story of the year is right under their nose, and nobody is there to cover Skripal leaving hospital. Quite bizarre, I would say.
No, that's obviously not a coincidence. That's obviously media manipulation again. This is what they do. We know this goes on all the time. This is why I don't understand why anybody can trust government or the mainstream media or whatever. It's all being manipulated. It's all fake, basically. And I say there's so many unanswered questions about the Skirple poisoning. It's almost embarrassing. I mean, Theresa May's initial premise that based on the evidence they had, it had to either be the Russian state or some sort of Russian dissident organisation. That doesn't take into account the possibility of a third party provoking a war between two other parties, does it? Now, that would be a good thing to take into account in your assessments anyway, even if you had no evidence of it. So it's a good thing to watch out for. But we have now plenty of evidence of a third party, usually the elite in some form, often, as we know, stoking up wars and conflicts and everything else. And this Skirple poisoning, to me, is an absolutely classic example of it. There's clearly a third party involved who managed to get hold of the Novichok at the demise of the Soviet Union. They've held on to it, waiting for a moment like this, and they then used it to try and stoke up the Third World War between Russia and the UK. And, of course, the UK has completely fallen for it.
Let me ask you about that, because there are a number of different theories about the Skripals. One being that rather than being a double agent, he is in fact some sort of treble agent, and that he's still working for the intelligence agencies here. Hence, he hasn't been produced. Let me ask you this. Best person in the world to have on speaking about this, yourself, David. If the Skripals were in the protection of the intelligence agencies and the Russian ambassador to the UK, Alexander Yakovenko, he's actually saying, well, I don't believe the Skripals. I want to see proof of their good health. I want to see proof that they're alive. I want to see proof that they actually still exist. Wouldn't the intelligence agencies, just to call his bluff, wouldn't they show some images or at least some video taken at an undisclosed location of the Skripals to prove they're alive and well?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll say you do the classic thing of proving someone's alive by doing the thing with the issue of a newspaper or a magazine. You know, they're alive on the date that's published. So you can do that at any time, can't you? But I say that's very suspicious as well that the Skirples have chosen not to be interviewed by Russian officials. And again, this to me is starting to look much more like a staged event. I mean, if you look at the expert assessment of Novichok, the cleaning up operation was risible. If there really was this absolutely deadly nerve agent all over the place, the clean-up operation wasn't adequate at all. And there's a real weird thing even with the pets taken from the house. There's like a couple of guinea pigs and a cat, and they don't seem to have been reported of any kind of poisoning at all. But the bodies have been destroyed. As we see on many occasions, you know, the body of Dr. David Kelly or whatever, you know, again, these are the tactics of the Zionist elite that if the evidence doesn't suit you, you destroy it. You know, the people who don't toe the line, you kill, and dead men don't tell tales. This is the world we live in. You know, what was once a world that happened behind the scenes in the Cold War between the KGB and MI6 and MI5 and all this kind of thing, is now spilled over into just about everything. But that's because we've had a massive expansion of private security. And these people are accountable to no one. They kill people, they discredit people, they invade people's privacy, bug their phones and so on. And nobody's monitoring that. Again, this is the world we live in. This is the country I look at now. I find absolutely unrecognisable from the country I grew up in. You know, all the things that we were told were great in our country and they didn't have in places like the Soviet Union and stuff like that, now seem to be embedded here.
Are people gullible? Are people galactically stupid? Or are people indifferent?
Now, I'll tell you what, Richie, people know. I mean, obviously, I go out in the world and talk to normal people, and no one believes the government anymore. That the chemical attack in Syria, no one outside the mainstream anywhere believed what the government was saying. It's just that what we have now, of course, are the people making money out of it, the paid agents, the political class, the mainstream media, who are all making a small fortune from this, yeah? This is why they can't stop it. You know, they've got to pay the mortgage and so on. But nevertheless, they are people who are essentially paid agents of the, when I say paid agents, all I mean is that they draw a state salary, therefore it's in their interest to keep this going. And again, this is where I find the insanity of mankind, is you can't expect the people who've caused these problems to solve these problems, especially when they're still benefiting from them. When we see the division of rich and poor, the political class and journalists and lawyers and people like that, they're on the side who've done very well out of this, basically. The honest people who've tried to tell the truth and blow the whistle, they're all the ones who've spent time in prison and had to face all sorts of problems. Again, this is the world we live in, but I cannot see how people who are making money from this system still are going to resolve it in favour of the people. And I say the solution is very simple. I come back to with all of this stuff is we've got to use the common law to stop paying mortgages and to stop paying taxes, basically, because that's the only language these people understand is money. If you take away their income, they can't pay people to carry out their evil.
I don't.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
If you did those things and then started to return to the land and growing your own food, a lot of problems would disappear overnight, and a lot of health problems, for example, would disappear. The reason we have so many health problems is because people are living in a dirty environment. There's things being sprayed in the sky that we don't know what they are, and the government doesn't seem interested in telling us. And again, this is a total violation of law and everything else. We have been poisoned in the food in the forms of additives and so on. We're seeing this full-scale attack upon humanity, and say not just our normal health, but upon our mental health as well. The fact that we're kind of expected to believe the nonsense that comes out of the mainstream. It's like, and you don't. You get attacked. You're the one who's terrible. You're the traitor and so on. That's how kind of crazy it is, but this is all obviously part of a wider spiritual challenge. So, you've got to hold your truth in those circumstances.
It's an inversion,
on the other
right?
side, I can't see where it can go, Richie, because the economy is collapsing. We have reports of retail failures every day. We're in the same situation, more or less, as 2008, except times 100, because the only way they got out of 2008 was by borrowing loads and loads of money. Now, obviously, at some point, you've got to start repaying that. They managed to keep the economy afloat with that money. I mean, till recently, they kept it afloat because they printed 250 billion just after Brexit, but it now appears that's run out as well. And
there's a massive crash coming.
Toes up.
There's a massive crash coming, of course, because each crash was designed to be worse than the one that preceded it. That's inevitable. One of the few things I claim to have an understanding of is the financial system. I used to explain it back in the day when I worked in mainstream media, and then I understood that that was complete and utter nonsense, and I began to realise how our financial system actually works. You're absolutely right. Each successive crash will get worse and worse and worse. It will result in the further impoverishment of larger and larger and larger numbers of people until there's very little left. Now, I want to take you up on something, because you said more and more people are understanding of what's going on. So I'm not going to argue with that. I'm going to say, okay, yes. So what I'm going to say now, you might not like, but you might like, but I know a lot of my listeners don't like, and they don't like hearing it. Let me tell you why we have a state of inertia, in my opinion. Let me tell you why people don't do anything. Because all people do, what people have resorted to, or what they have sought out, is echo chambers. They have sought out others who feel as they do to validate them. And we see this with the so-called independent media, or the alternative media, which is 99% as bad as mainstream media, because it's full of narcissistic wannabe celebrity presenters who do nothing but feed back to their audience that which their audience wants to hear, hence the validation. Narcissism is involved in that as well. We see that through social media. Because of that, we just have inertia. People are not going to get up and stand alongside their neighbour who's been squeezed by his local authority for no good reason, who's been put out of his house. They're not going to do that. This is the century of the self, to quote Adam Curtis. And you know, we see people turning up at truther conferences. What the hell good is a truther conference? It's good. Let me finish. It's good if you're speaking to people at those conferences. I'm not talking to you now, David, but it's good if those truthers are actually addressing people who are hearing the information for the first time. But they're not. They're speaking to people who already know that information. It's like a kind of a Comic Con thing. So it's a never-ending parade of narcissists. Nobody really is ever going to do anything. Echo chambers, independent media, it's all utter bollocks. That's my opinion. Go ahead. There you go.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Richie. Talking about narcissistic presenters, the other day, Alex Jones was justifying the Israeli action on the border when they murdered 50-odd people in a day. Yeah. That's kind of how crazy it's got. Obviously, he's a man who claims to believe in God, but clearly he's sold his soul to the devil. Well, if it is Alex Jones, of course, because we know there's a strong suspicion he may well be a lookalike. Yeah. But yeah, no, in terms of what you're saying, it's absolutely right about this kind of weird narcissism at the moment. There is something odd going on. And I think it's probably been induced by the vaccines, the chemtrails, say the diet and so on. The dumbing down the education system. A lot of reasons to explain why we seem to have more dumb people than we used to have, or why they're more vocal and more listened to, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
right.
I agree. I think it's now about the getting out of the system. I think there's no point in trying to reform the system. You know, the idea that you can return to the good old days and all that kind of thing. It's not happening. It's onwards and upwards to the future. We learn the lessons of the past. We take what is good, but we move on. There's nobody out there, because you've had this whole thing of common purpose putting their, mind-controlled slaves in there. And these people are very bland personalities, bureaucrats in politics and the media. Functionaries, not visionaries, basically. But it is a time now for visionaries. The reason things don't work anymore is they stop listening to people who are original thinkers, have original ideas, original problem solving, and replaced all of those people, I say, with these automaton-like people who are likely to toe the line. But that's, this is what you finish up with, because those people are not capable.
No.
And when they rise to the top, of course, they've got no vision, they've got no leadership skills. So it's a question of, it is trying to stick your neck out and trying to state your vision. Obviously, at times like even today, I get disheartened when people come back at me and say, I don't think common law's the way forward. But, you know, they haven't seen it properly. They haven't seen, you know, where it's going. They don't understand that this system is not going to continue. These are not recessions like we had before. You say this is going to be 2008 times 100. We're going to have God knows how many homeless on the streets. There's going to be therefore a surge in crime and violence and so on. This is, you know, this could be a terrible, terrible time. And this is partly why my position has always been to the government: please talk to me. I know what's going on in the world. I've called every war right. I've called every one of these things right that you've believed in, I've seen through. I know that the events of 9/11 are a physical impossibility by the laws of science. You know, and these are things you need to know. You know, this is the evidence you need to see.
Here's a question for you, though. Here's the question, David. Here's the question. What's to say that they already know this, but they're part of that greater effort to suppress it? For example, my friend Jean-Anne Crowley, the actress who's listening to this in Cleggan, in the west of Ireland, she's listening now. She says, I know the answer. She says, the media is the conduit between the powers that be and the populace, and the media is totally bought and paid for. These people know this stuff. Even run-of-the-mill, you know, government ministers, not necessarily secretaries of state, but government ministers, they know this stuff. It's their job to make sure that this stuff doesn't get out. Like, you know, you had it today, didn't you? You had Andy Burnham in Manchester today, the Scouse mayor of Manchester. It's an outrage, saying that people shouldn't be angry. They shouldn't be aggressive. They shouldn't be challenging. They should just stand together. But that's bollocks, David. Stand together. You know, 22 people were killed last year. Let's just stand together and light candles. So Burnham knows what's going on. He knows damn well that there's something very wrong with the Salman Abedi story. He knows damn well that there's something very wrong with the 7th of July story. And I'm sure he knows damn well that 9/11 was a hoax. But he's there to make sure that anybody who talks about it is ridiculed, ostracised, exiled, laughed at, mocked, as you've experienced. Go ahead.
I wouldn't be so sure that these people do know, given the way their lifestyles are managed and so on. They're kept very much away from, you know, real members of the public. They're kept away from the internet. So everything they receive is through the filter, you know, in the case of central government, the intelligence services, for example. So all they're getting all the time is propaganda. And of course, the intelligence services themselves are not wise enough to realise that they're getting propaganda as well. The intelligence is being fed into them, as we saw with the beginning of 9/11. They clearly fed intelligence into the system to make it look like it was going to be Muslim terrorists to deflect attention from themselves. So it's kind of propaganda on every level, basically.
Yeah.
So it's you know. It's not surprising that people don't quite see it. Nevertheless, to say the with ministers and so on, I say I don't think they do know. A lot of them don't know. I think there's some who might suspect things, but I don't think any of them have any idea of the full extent of it. Basically, I mean the full extent of the way we've been systematically lied to. On all sorts of levels, basically.
Compartmentalisation you're talking about, yeah. Sorry about that.
I don't know on your show how you approach these things, Richie, but I'm including here the flat Earth, basically, that all the evidence you look at points towards the Earth being flat. I keep asking these science people to show me the evidence of the Earth being a ball, and there isn't any compelling evidence. Every time they expect to find, you know, do scientific experiments to either find that the Earth is curved or it's moving, they don't get the data they want. So they have to invent something else. This is how they invent the theory of relativity, is because the Michelson-Morley experiment doesn't record the displacement of photons that you'd expect from a moving Earth. So rather than thinking, oh, the Earth's not moving, they come up with the theory of relativity.
Well, let me tell you this. Let me tell you this. There will be listeners to this program delighted that you've brought this up, because I don't agree with you. But that's okay. We're big and we're bad and we're ugly enough that we can disagree with one another. What I'm going to do is, I don't believe the earth is flat, but the reason I don't believe it is complicated, because I don't believe the earth is solid anyway. I believe that we exist in a simulation. It's a holographic construct.
Right.
I don't believe that because of my association with David Icke. That's not why I believe that. In fact, when David introduced this to me many moons ago, I said to him, I'm not buying it, Icke. At the time, I didn't buy it. But I've looked into it myself. I've read several books. I've spoken to people about it. And yeah, I believe it's a holographic construct. It's there because we believe it's there. And I believe that whatever designed it as a sphere. That's what I believe. But our listeners, some of them will be thrilled because they give me a lot of shite and they say, oh, Richie won't allow anybody on to talk about the flat earth. But that's not true. I've never, ever precluded anybody from coming on this show. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do, my friend, Mr. Shayler. I'm delighted you brought this up. I'm going to take a very quick break. When I come back, I'm going to shut up and allow you lay out the case for the earth being flat. How about that?
Okay, yep, no problem. Yeah, I can do that.
Brilliant. This is typical of the conversations we've been having for several years. They segue off into the weird and wonderful. So we'll do that. Thanks, David. Stand by then. If you want to grab a cup of water or a glass of water, you've got about 2.5 minutes. Right then, I can hear the sniggers from the Richie Allen listeners who are convinced that the earth is horizontal, is flat, and isn't a sphere. So when we come back from this break, David will make the case as to why that is. And I'm looking forward to it. Back in exactly 2.5 minutes. It is Tuesday, May 22nd, 2018. This is your Richie Allen Show.
Introducing the H2O app, a powerful water structuring application that programs vibrational energies into water through the use of different sound frequencies. Once programmed, the use of water for drinking, cooking, bathing. Give it to your friends and colleagues or spread it around the garden. The list goes on. It's not just water that the app can be used for either. It's great for programming crystals too. The H2O app is free to download and is available on both Android and Apple platforms. For further information, go to h2oapp.online.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever.
Right, welcome back to the programme. It is Tuesday's programme. It's 18.5 minutes past the hour. Thanks for staying with us. Yes, my guest this hour is none other than David Shayler. We've had David on many times before. Former MI5 agent. Go to bookofthelaww.org, by the way. That's David's website, bookofthelaww.org. A lot of interest in what David brought up about flat earth. Now, David, thanks for staying with me, by the way. Has he stayed with me? Do I have to call him back? All right, yeah, we've been cut off. All right. We've been cut off very briefly. So I'm just going to dial him back up and we'll get him back on. So if you do have a question or a comment about this flat earth, now's the time to do it. Because after we chat with David about this and after I get his thoughts on it, I'm not going to be looking into it too much again in the future. I don't think it matters. Do you know what? Even if it is, what difference does it make? And if it was, why would anybody want to keep that a secret? What difference does it make? Why would they do that? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. What have we? All right. Well, I think we might be able to get him back now. Can we get him back? That was a bit strange there. Again, those who subscribe to this flat earth theory will be saying, well, this is proof. This is proof. As soon as you get David Shayler to talk about this, he gets cut off. Some of you will be saying. I don't know why we got cut off there, but I'm calling him back now.
Hello.
Well, I don't know why we got cut off. One of those things, but there you are. The conspiracy theorists among the audience will say it's because you were going to talk about the flat earth. Right. Why do you know what, by the way? I've had several tweets saying this is typical. Nobody will take Shayler seriously now because he's saying this. He's his own worst enemy. We've actually had a tweet saying he's his own worst enemy.
Well, already. I mean, the Zionists must monitor every broadcast so they can have these little jibes all the time.
Right.
All I've mentioned so far is evidence. It's quite peculiar, isn't it, that people want to have a go at you for talking about evidence. And let's be clear, I obviously, it's like the Holocaust. I say to people who accuse me of being a Holocaust, don't you think once I believed in a Holocaust? Don't you think I once believed in a curved earth? Wouldn't it be interesting to think, why is this man who's blown the whistle and done all this stuff, why has he changed his mind about things like the Holocaust and the flat earth? And that's because of the overwhelming evidence when you actually examine these things dispassionately rather than listening to liberal propaganda, basically.
Okay.
And having that liberal approach to things in which you don't question things, you just receive facts and know that there's intelligent people out there who know things and therefore you must listen to what they say.
Right, just before you start telling us then, just before you get into it, by the way, I want to just point out, not because I feel I have to, but I believe in the Holocaust. I believe that Jews were targeted for murder and internment by the Nazis. I have questions like any decent journalist should have about numbers and, of course, about logistics. And, of course, I've got serious problems with the Holocaust industry, how it's been used as an excuse, basically, for the creation of the apartheid, not the creation of, but the crimes of the apartheid terrorist state that is Israel. So I just want to put that in there. But we're going to talk about flat earth for a moment, for the next few minutes. I say horizon, I say millions of images, millions, maybe trillions of images, satellite images. You tell me now, and I'm not going to interrupt you. This is terrible, isn't it? I could be really bad here. You've got 3 minutes, Mr. Shayler.
Well, first, obviously, the NASA images that people send me are inevitably paintings, basically. You've only got to look at the different... Well, there's been images of the Earth that look very different in terms of the size of the continents over the years. And now science has said, well, the Earth is actually pear-shaped. It's not actually an oblate spheroid. It's actually slightly pear-shaped. Oblate spheroid, slightly pear-shaped. But that's not shown in the photographs of the Earth that NASA took. Now, NASA in Hebrew, which is obviously the base language of the Zionists, means deception. So I don't think we can take anything that comes out of NASA too seriously, basically. And anybody obviously who's looked at the Apollo 11 moon landings, the first ones, will know that those were obviously faked, most likely by Stanley Kubrick. So we can set aside NASA evidence as paintings, doesn't prove anything.
Vivian disagrees. Vivian disagrees. I said I wouldn't interrupt. I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't interrupt. Vivian Kubrick, who does listen to this program, says absolutely no way did her dad have anything to do with the landings being faked. That's not to say that the landings weren't faked. I've got huge problems
why would
with
they
the
tell
landings.
His daughter? They're not going to tell his daughter that, are they? Of course, this is all
not they, but he.
Stuff. They're not going to tell some family member. Of course, they're not.
No, but he might have told her. He might have shared with the family.
No. These people were they know.
Right, I'm not buying it. Go on.
To get out, they get assassinated straight away, wouldn't he? He wouldn't tell anybody. These people in secret societies do have secrecy, and they don't tell their wives and family things. So, again, that's not an argument of evidence or anything else. It's just an assertion by somebody that doesn't really add to our understanding of truth at all. In fact, when you actually... at all. So, yeah, in terms of what you see yourself, I mean, when I was younger, my father... we were on Red Pier, and he said, "Oh, look out, you can see the mast going over the horizon." I said, "Oh, yeah, you can." He said, "Oh, it's the curved Earth." And he said, "Look at it again." And I looked at a telescope, and it's not going over the curved horizon. When you magnify it, the ship's mast, you see the whole ship. If you were magnifying, you just see the mast still, but you don't. It's just an optical illusion, the mast going over the horizon. When you start to examine the science of the flat Earth, it all starts to look a bit clearer. everybody who's performed something called the Bedford Levels experiment has never ever observed the curvature of the Earth. The very fact that you can see the Pyrenees from the Alps on a clear day over hundreds of miles, I think it's 200 odd miles, means that there should be loads and loads of curvature of the Earth. It means you shouldn't be able to see that. They should be in the way of your view. It's simply not there.
Yeah, but I can't see Blackpool Tower from here. I can't see Blackpool Tower from here. Why not? Why can't I see the Eiffel Tower from London with a telescope? I can't.
Well, say because of foreshortening, you can only see so far. It's a bit like with the parallel lines of the railway line when they look like they're meeting in the distance. Obviously, they aren't. That's an optical illusion. It's the same basic optical illusion. There's also some of the refraction from the atmosphere as well. But nothing to suggest that the Earth isn't flat. I mean, if you look at the pictures taken, say, not from NASA, but taken by a weather balloon from about 10 miles up, the horizon looks pretty consistently flat. In terms of... Hang on a second.
That's not true, though. I watched, like a lot of people watched, that crazy lunatic with the Red Bull team jump from the highest altitude that any guy has ever jumped from. You can clearly see the curvature of the Earth there. And let me put this to you, my friend. I know I said I would...
I know the fisheye lens.
I'm not buying
it. It's a GoPro camera that distorts the horizon. When they actually looked at how high he was, if you looked at the distortion, he was only over like New Mexico. New Mexico was taking up most of the planet. It wasn't a curved Earth. It was just a curved horizon from the effect of a GoPro camera. Anybody would tell that.
I've had a tweet from a pilot. Listen, by the way, this is great crack, by the way. I have the utmost respect for David and David's opinions. And I said I wouldn't jump in, but there's so many tweets coming in, and I am going to put these questions and then shut up. A pilot has tweeted us. I did commercial airline pilot training. All my navigation calculations were based on a globe Earth. The quickest route from London to Los Angeles is the Great Circle route over the Arctic. That wouldn't be the case if the Earth was flat. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Mr. Shayler.
Well, if you go on the internet, you can find various cases of where they've looked at the flat Earth model compared to the global model, and the routes make much more sense in terms of the flat Earth. In fact, there was even a story where a plane had to divert because a woman was pregnant, and it didn't make any sense when you looked on the global Earth. To divert it would have been longer than going to the plane's actual destination. But when you looked at it on the flat Earth model, it was obviously much closer, so the plane could go and do emergency landing. So people will tell you these stories about these things, but actually when you look at plane routes, they make much more sense on a flat Earth than on a global Earth. In terms of the science as well, we had what they call Airy's failure. Again, somebody trying to measure the curvature of the Earth using a series of tubes and observing the sun. Again, didn't see anything that would be consistent with the actual Earth moving. Now, when we put this together with the whole idea of the geocentric still Earth, there's scientific evidence for that. The Michelson-Morley experiment in quantum physics, which was backed up by the Sagnac experiment, both sought to observe displaced photons from the movement of the Earth, but the photons didn't displace. So again, if you apply Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is the most likely. The reason those experiments didn't record the displacement of photons is because the Earth is still. Now, the latest data that's come from the Planck satellite for the quantum physicists has shown the patterns of the universe, and it shows a pattern indicating that the universe is flat and it's geocentric. And to just be clear, geocentric means the Earth is in the middle of the universe. So that's the science. That's the science. And I keep asking these scientists for their stuff about it confirms the global Earth, and there isn't anything.
I'm not buying it. Hang on, I'm not buying any of this. Let me jump in. Listen, let me jump in. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. The Earth casts, as we know, it casts a shadow on the moon. Look at eclipses over the years, and the shadow suggests very strongly that the Earth is in fact round.
The idea that the moon fits perfectly into the sun because it's a proportional size and the distance is the sun from the Earth is obviously it doesn't prove anything one way or the other. But it seems a bit more likely to me that the reason the moon and the sun can fit so snugly together is they're about the same size and they're passing at about the same point in the sky. Seems to be a much more likely explanation than what we have in the global model. And indeed, people talk about the phases of the moon, but those are not the Earth casting a shadow on the moon. Of course they're not, because the moon's constantly moving around the Earth. The shadow would change. In fact, you've got to look out on a full moon, and to me, looking in my own eyes, that moon looks pretty flat to me. It doesn't show any signs of being a sphere. It doesn't dissipate light in the way that when you shine a torch on a billiard ball, for example, you get a point of light, and you get then the diffraction of light. You don't see that at all. It looks much more like the moon is, in fact, like a spotlight or something when it's full.
Right, I'm not buying that, but anyway, good. This is good stuff, right? But it's not that I'm predisposed to not want to agree with you. I genuinely just don't agree. The higher up we are, the further we can see. This is a fact. Let me put a couple of other, what I believe to be absolute facts. You know, you do see further the higher up you are. Obviously, the horizon thing, ships look like they're emerging from the sea. There's no doubt about that. Other planets, again, the millions and millions of images. Time zones, of course, the fact that it's night. It's approaching night here.
Because the sun and moon are moving around the Earth, isn't it? You know, you don't have to. You know, it's like people say to me, "Oh, you know, you can still circumnavigate a flat Earth around a central North Pole without falling off, basically." So none of these arguments conclusively prove a global Earth at all. In fact, when you actually say put the argument at the flat Earth, it seems that the flat Earth argument seems to provide a more simple and easier solution. And I have to say, if people are spiritual, that all the great spiritual texts talk about as being on a flat plane. Now, it may be inside a globe. That's the thing. This is what I'm thinking, is that we're on a flat plane inside a globe. That's my current thinking. But nevertheless, you'll find that in all the spiritual texts. Every ancient text, anybody who's ever delivered anything and it's been kept has said, yeah, the Earth's flat, basically.
Who benefits? This is the question. I mean, years ago, I should know this. It's been a long bloody day. But the great astronomers who first suggested that the world was indeed round were accused of heresy. Now people are telling me, I must give a nod, by the way, to Nathan Maverick, if Nathan is listening. He's a big proponent of the flat earth theory. Who benefits in keeping us in the dark about it, so to speak? What difference would it make to any elite? I mean, whether it's flat or not, who cares? What's the difference?
Well, to start with, you control the navigation of the Earth, don't you? If you control the navigation of the Earth, you can control the movements of peoples and armies and so on. So there can be a basic practicality about it. But I actually believe it's to do with another level. I believe it's all part of this attack upon humanity that we've seen in the guise of science. Well, it's not actually science. It's a form of political science as politics, really. The politicalization of science is one of the most dangerous things of our time. And what seems to have happened is they seem to have sort of attacked the whole notion of God and the Bible and man's relationship with God by using science and saying, well, look, actually, just on this bit of rock, floating around another bit of rock, there's like billions and billions of these and billions of galaxies. You're tiny, insignificant. You know, you're crazy to believe in any kind of God. You're crazy to believe you've got any kind of ability to connect to that God and change anything. So I think it's definitely, mainly, in fact, that's what it's all about. It was to try and discourage people from believing in God. Now, I believed in God when I thought the Earth was a globe. Obviously, believing in God now on a flat plane, as the Bible describes, I think that's a whole lot easier. So I really do think the whole global model has been propaganda to try to convince us that we are not creations of God, basically.
We've had a tweet from John. John says, I'm not buying this. David is only saying this so that MI5 thinks he's nuts. I suppose.
We've had this one before. I mean, they obviously, they've got to get some new script, basically. Yeah, no, I just say these things to make myself sound so mad that MI5
I'm not saying that.
I mean, how many times have I heard that, for God's sake? But I mean, the thing about it, it doesn't make any difference with the Zionists. It doesn't matter when you say mad things. If you're saying things as well that get up their nose and you're getting dangerous with it, they try and kill you. It's simple as that. And obviously, with stuff about things like the law and showing that way forward, that's completely different, and having some kind of vision. But I can, draw upon experience. I've worked in the intelligence service. I've seen these things from the other side. I know what government's like. So, I'm the kind of person who can cause all sorts of problems for them. And so they haven't laid up off me. Believe me not. They believe me, because they still mess around my computer, my phones, things like that. They still try and make my life very difficult to earn a living.
They're like the mafia, David. What you're describing,
mad stuff has stopped them doing that.
No, what you're describing there is mafia-like. the mafia never forgets is the old adage. And it seems
that's it, yeah. It's like that. People say you never leave the intelligence service, and I have to assure them that I did leave the intelligence service. I want to leave that world of complete madness. But they don't seem to want to ever let you go, kind of thing, if you see what I mean. It's like if you don't come back into the fold, they just keep watching you and fucking up your life, excuse me my language, messing up your life, until you die, basically. And that's the way I feel at the moment. So they're trying to airbrush me out of history. They won't listen to a word I've got to say when I've got extremely pertinent evidence about the state of the world, what's going on. My evidence about what went wrong in MI5 is as pertinent as ever, because clearly they haven't learnt the lessons from it. They're still incapable of being able to properly assess intelligence, and incapable of being honest with government as well.
Everything you said, by the way,
relevant.
Let me endorse that. Every claim you made about what MI5 and laterally MI6 were doing was later substantiated. And I've always had time for you, and that's not in any way to patronise you. I wouldn't dare do that. I've always had time for you because you're honest and you have integrity and you always say what you believe. I put that tweet to you because it was there. I don't believe that you're trying to convince anybody you're mad. If you tell me you believe the earth is flat, then I believe that's what you believe. We'll agree.
It's quite strange as well.
We'll agree to disagree on that, but anyway, go on.
Sorry, send these tweets saying I'm mad when all I'm talking about is rational evidence.
No, not saying you're mad. No, not saying you're mad, but saying that you're. Do you know what?
Doing it to sound mad.
It's Hamlet's antic disposition. That's right. It's the antic disposition from Shakespeare. Yeah.
No, but I'm not. I'm talking about evidence all the time. I'm trying to talk about a rational approach to evidence. And if you're a truly spiritual being, you've got to be open to new ideas, new models of things, new ways of doing things, and you've got to go and check those things out for yourself. I say it. There was a time when I was hearing the flat Earth stuff, thinking, God, this is going to be some terrible bloody CIA psyop or something, to discredit the truth movement. So I went online to check it out for myself, and that was it. It was a bit like when I began this journey, when I first looked at the Bible code and its uncanny ability to be able to predict the future. At that point, I was an atheist, and that's what got me going on the journey. So it's just the same thing. Every time I check these things out for myself, I realise the truth is the complete opposite of what we are being told. And even to the extent that we have a church that tells us that, Jesus Christ came 2,000 years ago. Saviour's already come. He's gone. This is your lot, basically. That is an out-and-out lie. And anybody who understands the prophecy will know that's a lie, because the Messiah is born to have life in himself, as the Bible says, and to be an immortal. So there can be no such thing as a dead Messiah. So they have to come up with all these kind of concepts like the church and so on to try and explain why the world is as it is, rather than looking at it and saying, well, this is actually the proper end times and the Christ is coming for the first time. And that's why things are as they are, basically. This is not happening by accident. Obviously, it's strategic, the enslavement of mankind and the poisoning of mankind and everything else, and that's to stop the wider spiritual awakening.
Let's... I think when we first spoke, we did something on the Bible codes, and I sat there listening, raptured, in fact, to use a great biblical term. I was absolutely all ears. I found it brilliant. Let's do that exclusively in the near future, a chat about that, because I know you're hugely passionate about it, and I know a lot of our listeners are. So I'm very interested in that. I just want to mention again, David Shayler. Let me just use this very quickly. Quick recap. David Shayler is on the line, former MI5 agent, of course, whistleblower, genuine whistleblower. Claims he made about the involvement of the deep state in so many different things were substantiated, chapter and verse, what he said back in the day. It nearly cost him his life. And I always love having him on this programme. I want to kind of bring this back to where we came in. This is wonderfully weird and bizarre the way we do this. The preamble, and then we go off in different tangents. But bring it back to where we came in, because that was sensational stuff last year, again, which turned out to be 100% true, that the man blamed for the Manchester bombing was the son of a man who was in the employ of MI6 and tasked with the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. Some of our listeners who are new to this type of radio would ask, and it's a good question, and I know you have the answer, help them to explain why it is important and why the news media should be all over the fact that Salman Abedi's father is a former MI6 handled agent. Why is that relevant? What might that mean? What are the implications of it?
Well, I would say at the very least, Richie, the MI6 expertise would have been used in the attack. I mean, Salman Abedi and Ramadan Abedi are part of the Islamic fighting group. We know that they had very close relations with MI6. MI6 will train these people, possibly give them equipment and so on. So that's what you can say at the very least. MI6's expertise would have been used. The device was said to be a complicated device, not something made in a bedroom, therefore something made by either an intelligence service or an organisation trained by an intelligence service. So we can say at the very least, say MI6 expertise was used. But what we need to establish exactly is what was the relationship between MI6 and Salman himself, because he had a relationship with the father, and they're part of the same group. We've got to think there's, that there could have been a possibility that Salman himself was working for MI6. But then, of course, this raises all the questions of, how far were MI6 responsible for pushing him into this or whatever? We know about false flag operations go on. We don't often get a clear indication of who might be behind it, but in this case, we have a prime sus. We have MI6. They say they've got form for this kind of thing. I can bear witness to that. We know they operate in this country. So, and the very fact that no one's investigating it, to me, shows that that MI6 are involved, and the government ministers and police and so on are actually scared to investigate. This is how, again, this is the world we live in. This is the country we live in at the moment, is that people will not investigate my material because they're actually scared of the intelligence services. I mean, literally in this day and age, say you can be assassinated like Dr. David Kelly if you blow the whistle or step out of line.
In the
we've only got to go look at the US and see all the people who died around Hillary Clinton to see that in the modern age, political assassination is a weapon of the elite.
Doctors who've asked questions about the efficacy of vaccines have mysteriously disappeared. You're absolutely right to say that. I don't care what anybody thinks. David is right. That is a fact. So if you had played the game the way you were expected to, if you'd been a good boy, you're obviously incredibly intelligent, you're very well educated, you could have been expedited up the promotion chain. We could have seen that. So imagine a world with David Shayler as a top man in MI5, maybe a very senior officer, maybe a boss, maybe somebody in charge of maybe many other agents. If somebody came to you last year and said, we had all this information from the French and from the Turks about this guy, about his movements in Syria, in Turkey, how dangerous he was, but we just lost him. He came back into Manchester a few days ago, we lost him, and then he blew up the foyer of the arena. You wouldn't buy that. You would not buy or accept that he had been lost. That would be an untenable position. Much more likely they let him into the country. Again, this is where you've got to look at the role of the intelligence services, is how far did they argue for him to be let into the country. Again, I could bear witness to something very similar from my time in the services when I went to the Libyan section. They'd let this Libyan terrorist in who had links to the IRA, who was under diplomatic cover, but nevertheless was a Libyan terrorist working for the organisation that carried out Lockerbie. And MI6, they knew all this, and MI6 had argued to let him into the UK so they could try and recruit him. They got absolutely nowhere with his recruitment. He led them a merry dance. And in the expulsion document, which I had to prepare, again, just creating work, this guy shouldn't have been there in the first place, MI5 admitted that he'd actually set up a pool of individuals in the UK that would be there to resume terrorist activities if the Libyan state decided to resume terrorism. So, once again, the intelligence services put our lives at greater risk by essentially not following even their own rules. They're not supposed to allow these people into the country in the first place. So the idea that they might have facilitated Salman Abedi entering the country is entirely consistent with what I know from intelligence. Looking at all the evidence that is available to the likes of me, I don't have producers or editors and you can only do as much as you can, or rely on intelligence experts like yourself and some of your former counterparts in the United States to put me right. For me, it was allowed to happen. It's a terrible thing to say, and I can't prove that. I have no proof of that. But I suspect that you might be right, and that he was allowed to do that because of the game.
At the very least, he would be allowed to do it. Yeah.
Isn't that tyranny beyond the imagination of most people? That the people charged with your protection could allow dozens of people, nearly 24 people, be murdered, and many others with life-changing injuries because they want to further another agenda, and that's the agenda they have for the Middle East. It's sickeningly evil, David. I can't get my head around it.
No, the whole thing is evil beyond belief. I mean, when you think about what happened with 9/11, that clearly now there is no compelling evidence of Muslim involvement in 9/11. Compelling evidence that Mossad were in the right place at the right time, though. But, the fact that we've caused this havoc in the Middle East on the back of these false flags, it's just, and the fact the government even now won't learn the lesson, won't admit, and keeps making the same mistakes. It's not mistakes anymore. It's evil beyond belief. It really is.
They don't care.
I say, even on a level of denying people cannabis as a cure for cancer. I mean, all the experiments show that cannabis kills cancer cells and leaves healthy cells unharmed. There's no other research showing any other substance on the planet does that, but apparently cannabis doesn't cure cancer. What do you mean? When it kills the cancer cells and leaves healthy cells unharmed, it's not curing cancer. I mean, this is where we are. This is where we are, Richie. I mean, and what mentality you have to want to prevent somebody from taking a medicine that stops the pain of cancer, that stops the people losing parents at an early age. How sick do you have to be? And I think that to me in some ways sums it up. It all goes from there. The whole thing with cannabis was the law is concerned with what one person does to another. What you put into your own body, you are sovereign over. So this isn't even a matter of law. The government should have absolutely no jurisdiction over cannabis whatsoever. And I say, even then, there's no harm done by it. There's no lethal dose of it. This is the safest substance known to man. It's God's medicine, basically, and obviously in the form of hemp pollen, do a whole lot of other things, and yet they are preventing us from having that. Now, that's got to be proof of a conspiracy, that the most useful substance to mankind is banned, that you're put in prison for using it without the government's permission.
Well, not only that...
As I say, that's the kind of psychopathy we're up against. That's the nature of the psychopath.
Not only that...
People who would rather legislation, which is optional anyway, would prevail over the suffering of millions of human beings who are getting cancer these days.
Do you know, listening to you there, it occurs to me not only that, but am I right in saying that the 1939, it could be 1939, the Cancer Act forbids discussion of anything outside of radiation treatment as being a cure for cancer or as having a positive effect on cancer? It's effectively against the law to declare that something can cure cancer. It's quite extraordinary that. Now listen, I want to put a caveat there. David has very, very strong opinions on the fact that he believes that cancer can be cured by cannabis. I've had guests on this program who totally agree with David. Some of them are doctors as well. I always just do I've got to do it. It's the responsible thing to do. I've got to do it. I've got to say to people, look into it yourself, speak to your doctor, speak to alternative health practitioners. There's no doubt that there is evidence that THC oil, cannabis, can have a very positive effect in terms of destroying cancer cells. There's no doubt about that. But I would take everything you hear, not with a pinch of salt, but take everything you hear, not so much at face value, and go and look into it for yourself, because that's a very serious thing. However, 97% of people who get radiation, it kills them. It doesn't work, and it ultimately results in their death. That's the terrible odds. In anybody's world, those are absolutely terrible odds. Radiation destroys your body. Please God, I never do get cancer. I hope I never do. Maybe I will, but I hope I never will. I certainly won't be getting radiation. poisoning to try and cure it. I'll certainly be going down other routes to try to deal with that, but please God, it never comes to that. We've got about 60 seconds left, David. Go to bookofthelaw.org. That's David's website. God, we've covered an amazing amount of ground and subjects tonight, and we even got a bit of flat earth discussion on this programme. Sabotage, I tell you. 60 seconds left, my friend. I'll give them to you. You've the final word on what we've talked about this evening, and as usual, it's been terrific having you on. Go ahead.
Well, I say the world we live in is, in terms of the mainstream, is completely faked. We now know we're being governed by psychopaths. These are not good people. They're ignorant people. And therefore, we've really got to get out of that system. And as I say, what I'm telling people is the world is changing on a spiritual level. And obviously, in terms of my own case, I'm coming out with a film called Life of David. In fact, it's not my film. It's a film made by a friend of mine who's a real filmmaker. And that basically goes through a bit of my whistleblowing, obviously, and some of my life and so on. There's a couple of bits of recordings from your show, Richie. Which
Brilliant.
is probably why I took it down from YouTube, basically. But people, obviously, that's coming up soon. This obviously completely destroys everything they've said about me. Shows the evidence for what I say. It shows, obviously, that I'm a reasonable man. I'm not a butter of anything. And crucially, I'm not the kind of middle class sort of academic they tried to make me out to be, and all this kind of thing. So they've got a real problem with that because, as I say, it restores my humanity. Anybody seeing it will see that I had good motives for what I did. I don't think anybody can dispute that. And so it's going to create a massive problem for the other side. But as I say, this is all part of the wider spiritual change. I've come here to deliver a message that love is the law, and that people need to get on the bookofthelaw.org and think, how can I get out of this system? Because when the moment comes of change, if you haven't gone through that redemption, if you're still part of this system, you're not going to be going to a very nice place. I mean, because you've been funding terrorism and war and all sorts of suffering of God's children. And I say the illegalization of what the Bible correctly calls the God plant when you translate it properly, rather than the King James's version of the plant of renown. So, it's all there. God gave us all this stuff. He gave us the law. He gave us hemp and marijuana. We can get on with it. He gave us access to the land through the law. So that's got to be the way forward. We've got to accept this system is a joke in some ways. And it's to say it'd be funny if so many people, if there wasn't so many people dying, basically.
Absolutely. Well, do us a favour. Come back on when that film is ready for release to talk about it. Make sure I get a chance to see it before we talk. I know you will do that. Bookofthelaw.org is David's website. Fascinating as usual, mate. Again, that's not patronising. It's always fascinating and interesting and thought-provoking having you on. I'll always be in great admiration for you for the incredibly courageous decision you took those years ago to tell the truth about these things and bring that information into the public domain. And I wish there were more people like you. And of course, that's a big issue going forward, protecting whistleblowers in this country. We're going to be talking about that in future shows as well. Godspeed to you, my friend. I look forward to speaking to you again real soon. Thanks again, David.
Thanks, Richie. Thanks for having me on the show again. And love to everybody out there, and just prepare for the future. Yeah?
Brilliant stuff, mate. Thanks for that. David Shayler live on the line from his home this evening. Bookofthelaw.org. Top man. Check him out there. Who'd have thought we'd be talking about flat earth on this programme today?